the talk is limits of markets, and I really don't mean sort of replacing market incentives. I mean, I've been working for the last few years on a project called TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, and sort of the purpose, I should stand on, the purpose of that was really to try to incorporate market incentives in biodiversity preservation. So it's not that I'm disagreeing with anything that Garrison said. How many people have seen this picture, just out of curiosity? Yeah, it's kind of, this has become almost sort of a poster child for the value of ecosystem services. This is from a county in China called Maoshan County, and the bees have become extinct there because of pesticide use and some other things. And so now the apple blossoms have to be hand pollinated. So this is a woman, a young woman, hand pollinating each apple blossom with a pollen and a pair of chopsticks. Okay, so on the surface, this seems just ridiculous, right? You have this service that we got free. Now we have to pay for it. We have to have human labor doing something that didn't cost anything before. So again, this is one of the pictures, one of the examples, actually along with the Catskill watershed, that's become sort of a poster child for pricing ecosystem services. With a colleague and a student from this area, we did a study, and the results are quite surprising. So anyway, pricing nature, commonly held belief that placing monetary values on ecosystem services is the best approach to ensure their preservation. So the implicit assumption that, again, those of you that have some economics, you know the concept of market failure, wrong prices, the wrong prices are put on things, and so the wrong signals are sent to the market, and so resources are allocated improperly. And with correct prices, then markets will provide for the efficient amount of preservation. In this framework, ecosystem services are appropriately thought of as an input to production. Again, the purpose of the economy, indeed the purpose of human society implicitly, is to produce economic goods and services. I'll kind of end on that. Okay, so in this county, bees have almost disappeared because of pesticide use that has to be now done by human labor. Again, it seems like just a pure cost that should be avoided with proper resource management. Okay, it turns out that humans are actually more economically efficient than bees. Many apple trees need cross-pollination, which requires like a pollinator variety of apple trees. So something like 25% of the apple trees don't produce apples. I mean, I don't know a lot about apples, but they're male trees that are sterile, and they have to be kept there for the pollen that the bees get to pollinate the other apple trees. Okay, with humans, you don't need those pollinator varieties. So instead of 75% producing apples, all the apple trees can produce apples. Human pollinators can work in windy and rainy conditions when bees can't. This is a mountainous area. There's a lot of wind and rain, and so humans are actually more efficient. They can get in there and pollinate the apples. Production goes up for that reason when you use humans. China is obviously has a large population, and most of the labor is supplied by neighbors who volunteer their labor. Again, it's a mountainous area, so there's a rapid change in elevation. So the trees come online in terms of when they need to be pollinated at a fairly different time. So you have like a week different time between when they need to be pollinated, even in a fairly small area. And so the villagers typically just go from one village to another, voluntary labor. This also creates sort of social bonds between the villages. The other advantages too. Anyway, the point here is that the ecosystem service is needed, but the bees aren't. This student took these really wonderful pictures. Okay, the point of this is not that we should destroy nature and replace it with markets. It's just to show that there really is this fundamental conflict, and we need to recognize that. I mean, certainly we need to put prices on things that are underpriced and so on, but there's a fundamental conflict between this sort of this self-organizing system that we've evolved into and the natural world. So anyway, so eliminating nature is or can be economically rational. I've been working a lot in recent years with evolutionary biologists, and they make an important distinction between proximate and ultimate cause. So a proximate cause, okay, why do apple trees blossom in the spring? Because the weather gets warmer, the days get longer, and so on. That's the best time. The ones that didn't pollinate earlier die off. Later, the fruit doesn't develop, and so on. But there's also an ultimate cause in terms of the sort of history of evolution. You know, the phylogeny of the evolution of apple trees, how they fit into the ecosystem niche, and so on. So you might consider like why do we use too much energy? A proximate cause might be that prices are too low. But the ultimate cause is this sort of system that we've created since the fossil fuel revolution. It's sort of self-organized consumer society, the tremendous increase in productivity from fossil fuels, and so on. It sort of created this, I keep using, it's not a living thing, but I keep using this term, this thing or this thing in charge. My colleagues kind of joke about this. But anyway, so the ultimate cause is this highly evolved socioeconomic system that thrives by continual expansion and resource exploitation. Okay, the traditional way of looking, again, at climate change, what are the arguments against doing climate change mitigation from traditional economists? Okay, so you have society's capital stock, you know, our productive capacity, natural capital, all the manufactured capital, machines, and so on, what's called human capital, education, training, and so on. All these are directed toward economic output, producing goods and services. Economists, they'll deny it if you try to pin them down, but really equate well-being with GDP, with economic growth, and so on. And this has now sort of become a world system, you know, producing economic goods and services that we're all a part of. I mean, all of us have talked about, none of us can survive without jobs, you know, without participating in this system. So again, the economic argument against doing something about climate change is anything you use to stop climate change mitigation, any diversion of those resources is a diversion from producing economic output. And it's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. By diverting resources, you're also creating jobs and income and so on and other areas anyway. But the problem is that the damage caused to the environment doesn't feed back into the system, and that's really the rationale for putting prices on things. I mean, we used to think, environmentalist, ecological economists, that the real danger was on the resource side, peak oil and so on. I think most of us have come to realize that this market economy, this again self-organizing system, it recognizes constraints on resources coming in. The system pays for resources, it seeks substitutes, and so on. But on the other side, there really aren't any signals. I mean, your factory producing something, climate change does not enter into the equation. So in this framework, the only time it's economically feasible or worthwhile to do something about climate change is if the damage to economic output caused by climate change is greater than the cost of mitigation. And again, that's sort of a tough bar to jump over because most of it really isn't apparent. Let's see, what do I have here? Yeah, so again, if you look at where we are in human history, this is sort of stepping out and look at the real big picture. People live sustainably on the planet for a very long time, you know, 500,000 years to 2 million years, depending on what you call human. The population was pretty stable, something around 4 million, 6 million. It bounced around a little bit. With the development of agriculture, we really leaped into a different system. It's called eusocial or ultra-social. The population jumped from about 4 million to 200 million in just a few thousand years. We had another leap starting about 200 years ago that is really playing out now with a vengeance. People have alluded to this throughout this conference, but where we're living now is really an incredible time. Most of the CO2 in the atmosphere added by humans has occurred within my lifetime since 1950 or so. So it was When I was born, it was probably around 300 parts per million. In a couple of years, it'll be 400 parts per million. This is absolutely astounding. I mean, it hasn't been that high for at least 300 million years, probably longer. In terms, population, the population of the planet has more than doubled within my lifetime. I think it's gone from like under 3 billion to about 7 billion now. The last billion was added in the last 13 years. So just absolutely astonishing and astounding. So, and all this is really because of this goal of economic output. 5 minutes, so I'm almost done. Because of the whole system is self-organized up and down the line toward this goal of economic output. And unless we change that, there's really, really not much hope. I mean, we're crashing the system. The population is going up to 9 billion. Climate change is already starting to affect agriculture, the ability to feed this number of people and so on. And it's not really as hopeless as I just presented it either. There are any number of ways humans can live on the planet. Until recently, there were all kinds of societies with all kinds of ultimate goals to build around. The danger is now, there used to be sort of competition between societies. There were different ways of being, different ways of doing things. Now we've created this one world system, one organism, if you will, with one goal. And in evolutionary terms, this is a really dangerous situation. We have one ecosystem, the whole planet, one way of doing things, namely the market economy. So there's no checks and balances, there's no competition. But anyway, a lot of people in this conference have talked about other ways of being, and there's a lot of hopeful things. The movement toward, for example, well-being away from per capita income as a measure. There's even countries, I think France is even moving towards a well-being index rather than per capita GDP to try to focus on as the goal. So if we had a different goal and a different again, sort of self-organizing principle, then I think things would fall in line. But again, it's a tough nut to crack. Okay, I think I'm done. Yeah.